A young girl stepped into her sick mother's place as cook on a rugged ranch. The lonely rancher gave her just one chance. He never expected she'd mend more than his meals. She'd heal his heart. The sun hadn't yet burned off the morning frost when Mabel Carrington rode into the Thatcher Ranch yard, her mare's hooves squelching through the thawing mud. She stood before the back kitchen door, weathered and split with time. Inside, heavy boots thudded against wood. The door opened with a reluctant groan, revealing Levi Thatcher. He stood tall, shoulders like split fence posts. He didn't offer a greeting, just let his gaze travel over the girl standing on his porch. "Who are you?" he asked, voice low as a storm rolling in from the hills. Mabel straightened her spine. "Mabel Carrington, I'm here to cook. My mother's sick." He frowned, not moving. "Ruth Carrington's daughter?" "Yes, sir. She said she was sending someone. Didn't say it was her girl." He looked past her to the gray morning, to the empty road. "You ever cook for 30 men before sunrise?" Mabel lifted her chin. "No, sir. But I've cooked for 2 when the roof leaked and the wood was wet, and we still ate hot and on time." Silence settled like snow. Levi studied her for a long moment. She didn't flinch. "Fine," he said at last. "One day." Mabel nodded once. "That's all I ask." He stepped aside. She entered. The kitchen was chill and still, a room that hadn't laughed in years. Mabel set down her satchel, pulled out a bundle, eggs wrapped in cloth, wild onions, a sprig of rosemary. She rolled up her sleeves and moved without hesitation. The firebox was low. She fed it kindling, coaxed flame, stoked heat like she'd done every morning since she was 9. Levi watched from the doorway, arms folded, silent as a fence post. He'd expected a mess, but her hands were quick, sure. Soon the kitchen filled with the scent of browning meat, simmering herbs, and buttered skillet bread. The warmth crept up the walls, filling the silence between them. Levi didn't say a word. But when Mabel ladled the stew into the pot and set the cornbread by the door, he stepped forward, took one long breath, and muttered something under it. She caught it. "Smells like before." Mabel stood by the stove, steady hands folding herbs into the simmering beef. Her mother's recipe called for patience. Let the onions melt down slow, coax flavor from the bones, not chase it. Outside, boots thudded on the porch. The ranch hands were coming in, shoulders hunched from the cold, faces worn and wind-bitten. They smelled smoke and onions and something unfamiliar, hope. Inside, Mabel had laid out tin plates with quiet precision. No frills, just stew, hot bread, and a ladle's worth of care. One by one, the men filed in. Sam, the big one with a busted knuckle. Tommy, quiet, always watching. A few others, suspicious eyes, sun-reddened necks. They looked from the food to the girl behind it, then to Levi, who stood in the doorway like a man waiting to see if the roof would hold. Mabel didn't speak. She simply gestured to the table. Tommy was the first to sit. He took a spoonful of stew and froze. "Good Lord," he muttered. "Tastes like Sunday." At the far end, Levi took a single spoonful, held it a moment, and tasted. The change on his face was almost invisible, but it was there, a tightening around his eyes, a breath he didn't know he'd held. He looked at Mabel. "Tomorrow," he said, voice like distant thunder. Mabel blinked. "Sir? You cook again tomorrow?" She swallowed. "Yes, sir." Mabel turned back to the sink, hands steady, heart pounding like a hammer beneath her ribs. As she scrubbed the plates, the steam from the water rose around her like mist on the morning plains. She didn't see it, but on the porch, by the step, Levi had left something behind. A bottle of fresh milk, still cold from the cellar. Before the sun crested the ridgeline, Mabel was already up, her boots soft on the kitchen floorboards. A chill still clung to the corners of the room, but she moved with purpose, gathering her mother's old sewing kit and a scrap of cotton cloth. The kitchen curtain had a long tear, frayed and sagging where time had tugged it apart. She knelt by the window, careful stitches closing the wound as daylight slowly gathered behind the clouds. Each pass of the needle was clean, tight, work born of care, not duty. Outside, the snow was melting in fits. Patches of brown earth peeked through the frost, and the horses huffed plumes of breath into the morning air. By the time the ranch stirred, breakfast was already underway. Eggs fried golden, cornbread muffins warming on the hearth, and coffee brewed strong enough to cut through sorrow. Levi appeared in the doorway, mug in hand. His eyes flicked to the curtain, then to the girl who now moved, like she belonged to the rhythm of the place. He didn't speak, just sipped his coffee and watched. When Mabel stepped out to clear snow from the trough path, Levi followed without a word. She didn't notice him at first, not until he stooped beside her, lifted the barn fork, and began to help. No command, no conversation, just two sets of boots scraping through slush. The wind bit at them, but they worked steady. Later that morning, Mabel prepared blueberry pie. Berries she'd picked herself, sugar measured with care, crust rolled light beneath her fingers. The smell curled through the rafters, rising sweet and clean. Levi lingered longer in the kitchen that day. He didn't sit, just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, gaze steady. When the pie came out, steaming and golden, he leaned forward, took a long breath, and nodded once. "Looks like something someone made on purpose," he said. Mabel smiled faintly. "I did, sir." He nodded again and turned to go, but before he stepped outside, he reached for the doorframe. The hinge squeaked, familiar and old. Without a word, he fished a screwdriver from his coat pocket, tightened the loose screw, and tested the swing. Evening shadows stretched long over the hills when Mabel sliced the bread for supper, the crust still warm from the hearth oven. Her hands moved quickly, steady from repetition, but tiredness hung heavy from the long day. That's when the knife slipped. A sharp intake of breath escaped her lips as the blade nicked the base of her palm. Not deep, but enough to draw blood, fast and red. The loaf dropped. Her hand flew to her chest, pressing the cloth of her apron against the wound. The kitchen, moments ago, filled with the quiet hum of stewing meat and rising bread, fell still. Then Levi was there. He moved faster than she'd ever seen, boots thudding on the plank floor, one hand steadying her elbow, the other reaching for a clean towel. "Sit," he said gruffly, voice not angry, just firm. She did. He turned on the pump, ran cold water over her hand, his fingers brushing hers. His touch surprised her, calloused, yes, but gentle. No trembling, no panic, just quiet care. He pressed the cloth into her palm, holding it with practiced certainty. "Let it breathe a moment," he murmured, eyes fixed on her hand. "You caught the top layer, not deep." Mabel nodded, unable to speak. Her breath trembled more than the cut did. He tore a strip from a linen rag, clean and sun-bleached, and wrapped it around her palm. The knot he tied was snug, careful. Their eyes met, brief, unguarded. "Thank you," she whispered. "You cook for a dozen hungry men. Best to keep those hands in one piece," he said softly, then added, "Tonight, you eat. I'll finish the stew." She opened her mouth to protest, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Not stern, something else. That night, Mabel sat at the long table with the ranch hands for the first time. Levi served the stew himself, awkward with the ladle but determined. When he placed a bowl before her, he lingered a second longer, his fingers brushing hers. She looked up. He didn't speak, but the warmth in his eyes outmatched the fire behind him. And for the first time, Mabel felt more than just tolerated in that kitchen. 3 mornings after the kitchen fell silent with that bandaged hand, Mabel stood by the hearth stirring beef broth, her injured palm clumsy beneath its wrapping. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and pine smoke, but in her apron pocket, something crinkled with every step, a letter. She hadn't opened it yet. She didn't need to. It was from her mother. She knew that slant of ink across the envelope, knew the weight of worry that sat in a widow's hand when it shook, writing her daughter's name. Levi entered through the side door, arms dusted with saw powder. His eyes swept the kitchen once. No smile, no frown, just that usual stillness. But he paused near the table, watching her longer than usual. Mabel turned away, wiped her good hand on her apron. She pulled the letter from her pocket and unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the worn paper. Her breath caught. "My fever's back, Mabel. I need you home soon. I cannot do this alone." The words swam on the page. Behind them lay the scent of old quilts and herb salves, the sound of a woman coughing behind a closed door. Mabel pressed the paper to her chest, silent. Behind her, Levi spoke. "Bad news?" She turned, surprised he'd asked. "My mother's worse," she said, voice quiet. "After this week, I'll have to go." Levi nodded slowly. "After this week, then." His tone was even, but his eyes held something else. Not anger, not disappointment. Something she couldn't name. Like wind against the side of a house. Soft, but insistent. That evening, as supper plates were cleared and the fire burned low, Mabel moved through the kitchen like a ghost. She cleaned, wiped, folded, hands steady but heart-torn. Levi lingered at the doorway. "You'll be missed," he said simply. Mabel blinked, her throat tight. "Thank you, sir." He nodded once, then stepped outside into the dusk. And for the first time, the quiet in the kitchen felt heavier than silence. The next morning broke gray and wind-bitten. Mabel wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and swept the porch as she had every day since arriving. But today, her saddlebag sat by the door, half-filled, waiting, like her. She hadn't told the ranch hands yet. But word had a way of traveling on boots and glances. They knew. Levi said nothing all morning. He ate his breakfast slow, watching the fire more than the food. When she offered him his usual second cup, he took it without a word but held it longer than usual, like it might speak for him. That afternoon, Mabel hauled the last of the firewood into the kitchen. She stopped cold. Fresh wood, still wet from the axe, sat in a neat stack by the hearth. Pine split, clean-edged, and steaming slightly in the warmth. She hadn't brought it in. Levi had. She turned, but he was already gone, back out to the barn. That night, long after the supper dishes were dried and stacked, Mabel heard it, hammering, faint at first, then louder, more deliberate. She stepped onto the porch, squinting through the dark. Levi stood by the roofline, sleeves rolled, lantern hung from a rafter hook. He was fixing the leak she'd patched twice with oilcloth. The ladder creaked beneath him as he worked, methodical and unhurried. "You shouldn't be up there in the dark," she called softly. He didn't stop hammering. "Didn't want you leaving under a leaking roof." Mabel stepped closer, breath-catching. "You did that for me?" He paused, eyes meeting hers in the lantern glow. "For what you planted here." She blinked, unsure if she imagined the tremble in his voice. Not just stew and muffins, but quiet, order, a kitchen that laughed again. He climbed down slow, set the hammer aside. Neither of them spoke as he passed her on the porch. But when he brushed by, his shoulder touched hers, warm and solid. She stood there long after he went in, listening to the wind shift, to the hammer's echo fading into memory. And, in her heart, something that had once been packed away came quietly undone. Snow tapped against the window panes like fingers reluctant to say goodbye. It was Mabel's last full day on the ranch, and she felt every tick of the clock in her bones. But she didn't let it show. Instead, she rolled out the crust. Flour dusted the air. Wild plums, sweetened and spiced, rested in a bowl nearby. Her mother's winter pie recipe wasn't written. It was remembered, passed by voice and habit, shaped by weather and the strength of your hands that day. She worked silently. The fire crackled low. Outside, the ranch was hushed under a thin curtain of snow. Inside, the air filled with cinnamon, nutmeg, and the kind of warmth that settles deeper than food. Levi entered quietly, boots dusted in snow. He didn't speak, just stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, watching her weave strips of dough across the top of the pie like a farewell letter. She glanced up once, met his eyes, then turned back to the task. "My mother used to make this every winter," she said softly. "Said it could warm hearts when the frost wore everything down." Levi's eyes didn't move. "I knew someone like that," he said after a beat. "Used to press a grain of wheat into the top crust. Said it brought good fortune." Mabel paused. Her fingers stilled. "Did it?" He didn't answer. Later, as the pie baked and the snow thickened, she found it, tucked beneath the hearthstone near the firewood stack. A small wooden token carved with the shape of a wheat ear. Smooth, precise, worn with years, but cared for. She knelt, fingertips tracing the shape. It was simple, yet beautiful. A quiet offering. She turned slowly. Levi stood at the threshold. His voice came soft as smoke. "It's for protection," he said. "For the house. For whoever keeps it warm." Mabel swallowed, throat tight. "You carved it." He nodded. "For her?" He looked toward the fire. "And now, for you." She held the token close, heart thudding louder than the wind outside. He didn't step forward, didn't speak again. But in that moment, between pie crust and carved wood, something passed between them that didn't need naming. Something that didn't melt with the snow. The ranch was still the morning after Mabel rode away. No scent of cinnamon in the kitchen, no soft footsteps on the porch. Just cold pans, yesterday's ash, and the wind howling through an open gap in the window where she'd once mended the curtain with careful thread. Levi sat at the long wooden table, untouched breakfast before him, overcooked ham, dry biscuits. He chewed slowly, each bite more sawdust than sustenance. His fork clinked against the tin plate with a hollowness he hadn't felt since the months after his wife died. The hands came and went. Tommy gave him a nod. Sam muttered something about stew, but Levi didn't answer. He stood after a few more bites, his appetite already gone, and crossed to the drawer Mabel had used every morning, where she kept her linens, the salt tin, her folded notes and lists. He opened it. There, right at the front, lay a slip of paper, folded once, tied with a bit of string. His name on the outside. Levi. He hesitated, fingers tracing her handwriting. Then he unfolded it slow, like unraveling something sacred. Inside was her plum pie recipe, handwritten, flour smudged in the corner. Precise instructions, careful notes in the margin. But below the ingredients, a second line, written in softer script. "Thank you for letting me care for your kitchen, and maybe for letting me care for your heart just a little." His breath caught. He read it again, and again. Then he pressed the paper flat on the table, laid both hands on either side of it, and bowed his head, not in prayer, but in something close, something aching. The kitchen around him was unchanged, but he wasn't. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. Inside, Levi folded the paper, slipped it into his coat pocket, and stood still by the stove. Evening crept soft across the ranch, laying long blue shadows across the kitchen floor. The hearth flickered low, casting light just bright enough to see the paper in Levi's hand. He unfolded it once more. Mabel's plum pie recipe, written in her even, tidy script, the lines still scented faintly of flour and the lavender she tucked into her apron. Levi rolled his sleeves. His hands, meant for bridles and fence posts, trembled only once as he reached for the flour tin. He moved slowly, measuring, mixing, rolling. Each motion guided by memory, not skill. He remembered how she pinched the crust edges, how her brow furrowed just before she poured the plum mixture into the shell. He mimicked each detail, not to perfect it but to feel closer to her, to touch the trail she left behind. The fire grew warmer as the oven took life again. Outside, wind tugged at the eaves, but inside it was still, like the kitchen had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to bring purpose back. When the pie was done, its golden crust glistened under the hearthlight. Levi let it cool, then cut a generous slice. He sat at the table alone, lifted his fork slow, and tasted. The flavor hit like a memory. Sweet, tangy, deep with warmth. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since Mabel left, he exhaled fully, not because he was full, but because he wasn't empty. He reached into his coat, pulled out her note, and placed it beside the plate. Then, slow and sure, he folded it again, not to hide it, but to carry it. Somewhere deep inside him, something stirred, and Levi Thatcher, once lost in silence, now knew which way the trail bent. The morning sun was still low when Levi saddled his horse, leather reins taut in his weathered hands. Tied to his saddlebag was a cloth-wrapped pie tin, still warm, plum-sweet, edges browned just right. He didn't speak much to the ranch hands that morning, just muttered something about needing to check on stock in town. But Tommy saw the glint of the dish, the careful way it was bundled, and he knew. The ride into Carrington's Hollow took 3 hours steady, dust curling behind him, wild grass tugging at the trail. The town hadn't changed much since winter. Same slanted church steeple, same swing post outside the general store. But to Levi, it all looked different, because somewhere in that town was a girl who'd changed everything. He dismounted in front of a squat wooden building with a new sign hanging proud above the door. Carrington's Table. Hand-carved, painted wheat on the edges. He smiled, just once. Inside, warm light spilled across polished wood and hanging herb bundles. The scent hit him, cinnamon, butter, and something bright, like wild mint, and there she was. Behind the counter, hair tied back, apron dusted with flour, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Mabel. She looked up. Time stopped. For a breath, neither of them moved. Then her mother appeared from the back, cheeks rosy, voice surprised. "Well now, Mr. Thatcher." Levi cleared his throat. "Brought something. Figured your pie dish might be lonely without company." He set it down on the counter. The cloth fell open. Plum pie, still warm. Mabel stared at it, eyes wide. "You made this," she whispered. He shrugged, then nodded. "Followed the recipe. Didn't burn the crust." Her mother reached out, hand to her heart. "That's the first kindness this kitchen's been gifted from the outside in months." Mabel stepped forward. Her fingers grazed the edge of the dish, then touched his hand. It was a light touch, but it landed like thunder in his chest. "I didn't think you'd come," she said softly. He met her gaze. "I didn't think I'd be welcome." She shook her head, slow. "There's always room for warmth." And in that tiny room filled with pie and memory, Levi felt something settle. The beginning. The midday light filtered through lace curtains and warmed the floorboards of Carrington's Table. Laughter drifted from a back table where a pair of old ranch wives shared biscuits and coffee. The air smelled of cornbread, blackstrap molasses, and a hint of lilac soap. Mabel wiped her hands on her apron and glanced at Levi. He stood awkwardly by the pie case, hands too big for the delicate shelves, hat held to his chest like he didn't know where else to set it. She stepped closer, voice soft. "You rode all this way just to return a pie?" His eyes flicked to hers. Pie, and something else. He hesitated, pulled a folded piece of wood from his coat pocket. The carved wheat token, the same one from under the hearthstone, the same symbol that now crowned her sign. "I carved another," he said, "for this place if you want it." Mabel took it gently, running her fingers over the grooves. Her throat tightened. "It belongs here," she whispered. Levi nodded, glancing around. "I don't know what you've built exactly, but it's something solid, something warm." He looked back at her. "And if there's space, I'd like to help keep the stove lit." Mabel tilted her head, heart fluttering. "You're offering to stay?" "I brought wood," he said simply, "and hands to stack it. Might not be much of a cook, but I know how to build a porch that don't leak." She laughed, quiet and sudden. "You're better at pie than you think." Their eyes met again, closer this time. From behind, her mother coughed gently. "Coffee's hot, Mr. Thatcher." He turned toward the back room, then looked to Mabel. "You two talk. I'll fetch my coat after." Mabel reached for the pie dish, brushing her fingers along his one last time as he handed it off. "There's always room here," she said. "For Wood, and for you." Levi smiled. Real this time, slow, certain. Then he stepped aside, letting the scent of pie and the promise of something steady fill the air between them. By the end of that first week, folks in Carrington's Hollow no longer whispered when Levi Thatcher walked through the cafe door. They just nodded. Because every morning, before the biscuits browned and the kettles hissed, Levi was already there. Shirt sleeves rolled, stacking kindling, repairing the back step, and oiling the door hinges that once squeaked like crows on a wire. Mabel didn't give him chores, he just did them. And she noticed how he sanded the counter where her elbows rested during long days. How he reinforced the pantry shelves without ever being asked. How he swept snow off the back stoop before she even stepped outside. One evening, as dusk painted the cafe windows amber, Mabel emerged from the kitchen with a steaming tray of stew and fresh bread. She paused when she saw Levi kneeling beside the wood stove, laying kindling like a prayer. Careful, reverent. She watched for a moment, then stepped closer. "You always tend fire like it's a secret," she said. He glanced back, eyes crinkling. "Fire don't roar if you feed it right. It listens." Mabel crouched beside him, shoulder to his. "What's it saying now?" He smiled, just faint. "Says this place is warm, not just the stove." That night, as they locked the door and drew the curtains, Levi turned and gently tucked a wild strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered. Not bold, just steady. "You built something here," he said. "But maybe it was never meant to stand alone." Mabel looked at him, heart full. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to do everything by herself. They stood together by the window, firelight flickering across wood and flower-dusted aprons. Spring settled soft over Carrington's Hollow. Windows stayed open longer. Birds returned to the trees out back, and Mabel's herb garden, once frostbitten, bloomed in fresh green. Inside the cafe, laughter came easier. The stew tasted heartier. And the new sign was ready. Levi had carved it by hand. A slab of pine, polished smooth. In the center, an ear of golden wheat, etched deep into the wood. It matched the little token Mabel still kept beside her flour tin. Around the edge he'd burned the name, Carrington's Table. They hung it together one morning just as the mist lifted from the street. Mabel stood back, her hand in Levi's. "It looks like it's always been there," she whispered. "Maybe it was just waiting for the right hands," he murmured. For a while it felt like peace might finally stay. But peace, in the Wild West, don't last without a fight. That very afternoon, a rider came in from the North Trail. Dust caked his boots and shoulders. He wore a stiff hat, low over his brow, and a mean cut of jaw. He didn't tie his horse properly, just tossed the reins and stepped through the cafe door like he owned every room he entered. Levi saw him first. He stiffened. Mabel, behind the counter, paused mid-stir. The man's eyes scanned the room, slow, cold. Then they landed on Levi. "Well," he said, voice rough as gravel, "didn't expect to find you playing house, Thatcher." Mabel's spoon stilled. Levi's jaw tightened. "Didn't expect to see you again, Ransom." Duke Ransom. A man from Levi's past. A rancher, rival, and once a friend. But that was before debt and pride turned him into something else. "You cook now?" Ransom smirked. "Or just carrying aprons for the girl?" Levi didn't answer. Mabel stepped forward, steady. "Can I help you, sir?" He looked her over, smiled without warmth. "Just passing through. Heard you had a good pie. Figured I'd see what made this place so friendly." Levi stepped in then, calm, firm. "You've seen enough." Ransom's eyes narrowed. "Still got that temper under all the quiet." "I've got a door too," Levi said. Use it. A long pause stretched like a drawn bow. Then Ransom smiled slow, tipped his hat to Mabel. See you around, miss. He turned and left, the cafe door slamming behind him. Outside, the wind picked up. Mabel exhaled. Who is he? Levi didn't answer right away. He looked at the wheat sign above the door, then back to her. Someone who doesn't like to lose what he thinks he owns. Mabel's heart sank. The warmth in her cafe had drawn Levi in, but it had drawn trouble too. She looked at him. Will he come back? Levi's hand tightened around hers. Probably. She didn't flinch. Then let him, she said. This time, I've got firewood stacked, and I'm not leaving. And under the wheat sign, as the wind howled down the street, they stood side by side. Duke Ransom didn't return the next day, nor the day after, but his shadow lingered, on porch steps, in the stiff glances of townsfolk, and in the way Levi's eyes tracked the street each time the cafe bell rang. He hadn't said much since that run-in, but Mabel knew the silence wasn't fear. It was preparation. Still, the cafe kept running. Mornings, Mabel rolled dough and brewed coffee while Levi polished the tables, repaired a back stool leg, or hauled water from the pump without a word. No grand gestures, just presence. One morning, as the sun poured amber through the windows, Mabel brought out 2 steaming bowls of her heirloom stew. She set one in front of Levi, the other before herself, and slid into the seat beside him at the customer table. He looked at her, surprised. You're sitting? I'm eating, she said, smiling. Beside the man who helped me build this kitchen into something worth keeping. He stared at her a long moment, then nodded. About time. They ate in peace, shoulder to shoulder, surrounded by the warmth of worn wood, firelight, and the quiet hum of home. That evening, just as they locked the cafe doors, Levi reached into the drawer behind the counter and pulled out a small, hand-carved sign. It matched the wheat symbol above the door, but this one bore 2 names beneath it, Mabel and Levi. He didn't say anything. He just set it gently above the hearth. Mabel looked from the sign to him, voice quiet. It's real now, isn't it? Levi met her eyes. It's always been real, but now it's shared. Outside, thunder rumbled far off. The air smelled of rain and reckoning. Mabel didn't flinch. She reached out, laced her fingers through his. You're not facing it alone, she said. Levi nodded once. No, he said, not anymore. The storm came on a Sunday evening. Rain lashed the windows. Wind rattled the eaves. Thunder rolled low, like hooves pounding far off ground. But inside Carrington's table, the fire burned steady. Dishes were done, the door locked, chairs flipped on tables, and Mabel stood barefoot by the hearth, her hand resting on the small wooden sign. Mabel and Levi. Levi entered from the back, lantern in one hand, soaked coat in the other. His eyes swept the room, not for danger, but to make sure everything was in its place. Stable's tight, he said. No sign of Ransom. Mabel looked at him. Yet. He hung the lantern and stepped close. If he comes, he won't find what he's looking for. He'll find us. They stood like that, face to face, as the storm beat harder. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the door. Levi moved without hesitation. He didn't reach for a weapon, just unlatched the door and opened it slow. Duke Ransom stood on the porch, soaked to the bone, hand resting on his belt. But he didn't draw. He didn't smile. I lost everything, he said, voice rough. Land, cattle, pride. Levi didn't blink. So you thought you'd take what I had left? Ransom looked past him, toward the glow behind Mabel's shoulder, toward the kitchen, the warmth. That pie you made, he muttered, tasted like something I haven't had since my ma was breathing. Levi waited. Ransom's jaw twitched. He looked down, fists clenched, rain dripping from his hat brim. "I came to ruin it. Couldn't stand that you had peace." He looked up. "But I saw her face," he added, nodding toward Mabel. "And it made me remember what kindness looked like." The porch creaked under his boots. "I ain't here to fight," he said finally. "Just wanted to see what I'd thrown away in my own life." Levi stared at him for a long, steady breath. Then he stepped aside. Ransom blinked. "You won't find it here," Levi said. "But you're welcome to warm yourself before you ride on." Ransom didn't enter, but he nodded, once, sharply, then turned, mounted his horse, and rode off into the storm. Inside, the fire flickered, untouched. Mabel stepped forward, heart pounding. "You forgave him?" Levi turned to her, quiet. "No, but I didn't want to carry his weight into what we're building." She stepped into his arms then, no hesitation. They held each other in the soft glow of the hearth. Outside, the wind passed on. Inside, peace held. Not loud, not perfect, but real. Later, with chairs set back, and the world quieted, Mabel baked cornbread by lantern light. Levi stirred the stew pot, humming a tune neither of them could name. And when they sat down to eat, just the two of them, storm behind, fire ahead, it was no grand moment. It was just right, the kind of moment the Wild West rarely gave. But that night, in a kitchen warmed by pie, forgiveness, and firewood carefully stacked, it did. Because some fires don't roar, they stay.